Hello, everybody. We're a bit late on Narrative Live tonight as I'm still trying to figure out this great new technology, which one day I will get to fix and we'll do properly. But we had to revert back to Substack Live, and we thank you for being here and let everyone join us in the room. I should tell as well that we've got two guests coming up on the show today. Ellie Leonard will be joining us at 8 o'clock, and that's important because she's probably expecting an invite from a different platform, but you'll be doing it from here instead. Um, as well as Janessa Goldbeck will be joining us at 7:30. I'll send you an invitation, Janessa, in just a few minutes. We'll get you all sorted out. Sorry for the change of venue, but tonight is an auspicious night because it's exactly 1 year of the Donald Trump 2.0. It's quite an achievement, Olga Loudman, that we finally have arrived here. He promised us a golden age, and instead, what we got was a Ukraine war that is still going on. He said he would end it in 24 hours. He obviously didn't. We've had inflation rise from 2.3% to 2.7%, even though he promised the lowest prices on day one. 22 million Americans have lost their health coverage or are facing skyrocketing costs. The federal workforce has been gutted. Half the education department is eliminated. The USAID has been dismantled. Healthcare plans for after 9 years of promises, they've got a framework, they say, but nothing significant. China trade deal is going to be announced, is still in the process, but not actually getting done. Military intervention in Venezuela has killed over 100 people and kidnapped their president. We've got negative net migration for the first time in 50 years in America. And today, in a 90-minute rambling press conference, the president announced his intentions to seize Greenland by force, possibly crippling NATO. This is quite a stunning roster of achievements for the first year. What's your take as here we are at the 1 year mark and facing autocracy?
Well, I mean, he did say that he had a hell of a year, and no one can argue with him on that, except it's just none of it is good. I mean, we have U.S. cities under military occupation. We potentially are going to war with Iran as soon as this weekend. Venezuela, we still don't know what's going to happen because, if he thinks he's going to walk in and just steal oil, as he basically said was his intention, we don't know what's happening there. And that's it. And I mean, as far as NATO is finished. I mean, I can tell you, NATO is finished. I work on geopolitical issues for forever. Um, there is not one European country or NATO ally who will trust us after what's happened. Whether Trump uses force to illegally invade and annex Greenland, or he doesn't, I can promise you there's not one European country who feels comfortable with Americans being there in Europe in military bases, because now every country has to worry about their national security and what are these military bases doing or preparing for. And that's it. So once you break that trust, it's finished. So NATO, as we know it, is finito. That's it.
That's a hell of a statement you're making there. Of course, tomorrow in Davos, the president will be addressing everyone there, the business leaders and the political leaders alike who are gathered there. But the only topic of conversation appears to be what's going to happen to Greenland, and appears to be the conversation around, whether NATO will be fighting against the United States or for the United States. I mean, it's sort of remarkable that we've now entered an era where we're not sure if the United States is part of NATO.
Like I said, NATO, and someone just asked if it could be reconstituted, and I've been writing a lot about this over the past year, and frankly, before even Trump came into office, I had written 2 years ago to this date about should Trump come back to power, that it would be the end of NATO. And I have been advocating for basically the same framework without the United States. So here you can actually have all the NATO countries involved. Frankly, I would kick out Hungary also because that's, Russia's proxy sitting there and sabotaging everything. But I would kick out the United States, Hungary, and then include Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, Japan, and they can obviously Ukraine, because Ukraine is the only country, frankly, out of all the countries that has fighting experience, um, and they can have a different alliance. Both for European security and for security in Asia, because it's not ending. I mean, this is all interconnected, as I've warned. You know, there was no coincidence that, for instance, Russia picked up surveillance flights and, flying their fighter jets jointly with China last month, alongside South Korea and Japan. I mean, this is all interconnected.
It is all
And that's
interconnected, yeah.
and
Um, I'm
this is why it
I
would
just
be
want to pick up on
good
that
to have
point.
that.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I want to pick up on that point you make about an alternative NATO, and that really is now a topic of conversation that's being had even in public by some of Europe's leaders and other leaders. People think of Europe as being somewhat uh, weaker than the United States, and sure, on a nuclear basis and all that basis, there's a lot that that Europe doesn't have that America has, that Russia has in terms of nuclear power, maybe China has in terms of nuclear power. But the Europeans are very strong in terms of their military force. They've got a very, obviously, long tradition of being fierce warriors, but also, great technology and a large standing army. I think it was you mentioned the other day. Someone mentioned 1.5 million standing army if all the European countries combined. This is not one of those forces that you can just overrun if that's what Donald Trump thinks he's going to be able to do. That's not what's going to happen.
Look, Europe's biggest problem has been that it is an obstacle to itself because it always relied on America and was always treated America as if something happens, they'll have our back. Um, but Europe is just as strong. And as far as nuclear, all you need is one nuclear weapon to cause anything.
It's enough
And France
deterrence.
has and France has nuclear weapons. The UK had nuclear weapons. France, as a matter of fact, last year, I believe it was in the spring of last year, offered a nuclear umbrella to Poland and a few other countries. So, I mean, all you need is one nuclear weapon. And, there's no difference if Russia has thousands, the US has thousands. One weapon will do the damage. And as far as having nuclear weapons, having them will be a deterrence in itself. And now you have even, I believe, the Nordic countries are discussing creating a nuclear deterrent. So,
Hmm.
I mean, the only thing that Trump's, insanity is doing is basically forcing everyone to seek out nuclear weapons. And I can tell you, I mean, this is something that should have been done a long time ago, because I can tell you, as a Ukrainian, the United States and the UK made us give up nuclear weapons in the 90s for sovereignty and guarantee of sovereignty. And you know what that got us? A freaking invasion in 2014, where Obama turned around and said, not my problem, put a few sanctions. Europe continued business as usual. And then the full scale invasion in 2024. So I mean, 2022. I am all for nuclear weapons. And frankly, if I was the Ukrainian government, I'd be looking for a nuclear deterrent too, because had they had nuclear weapons, no one would ever, launch a full scale invasion into Ukraine. So
Yeah, I mean,
this is
those are all
what's
very good
happening.
points. Yeah.
Everyone right now is out for nuclear, developing a nuclear program, and this is all that Trump had, basically accomplished out of this.
Let's talk a little bit more about Ukraine because you've got a country there that was, a weakened military at the start of this war, but has now become a very dominant military force in Europe. Their technology is bar none in terms of drone warfare and other technology. They've certainly shown what they can do against the Russians. They're going to become a very important player in this coming world. What do you assess the game plan is with Ukraine? And do you think Zelensky is looking at the world with an ability to actually help Europe in terms of fighting this war?
Absolutely. And look, Ukraine is under a daily assault. I mean, right now, as we speak, you have, millions who are sitting without heat. Imagine sub-zero temperatures, and there is absolutely no heat. I can't even imagine how many elderly people are going to die after this, because some people can pick up and go to a cafe and ride it out, others can't. But through all the, assault that is happening, over the past few years, Ukraine is the first one who is always offering assistance to Europe. So, for instance, in September, when Russia flew in, 19 drones through Belarus into Poland, it was Ukraine who reached out to the Poles and said, listen, we know a lot about drones and we definitely know about drone incursions. Um, Let us help you. And they've done this pretty much every single capital across Europe because every capital has been hit with Russia's drone incursions, especially over the past several months. So, yes, they definitely, you know, can contribute. And it is really the only country who actually has fighting experience, in
Recent
any
firing
kind.
experience. Yeah.
Yeah, in all territory, in all styles of war. There is a reason that the United States was parked inside of Ukraine over the past few years, watching which weapons work, what tactics work, what is not working, even with Ukrainian weapons. And even, Trump, when he's not in his batshit crazy stage, said that he envied Ukraine for their drones and, would love to have a partnership with drones so the U.S. military can have the same capabilities.
Well,
So, yes.
let me ask you a little bit more about Greenland, and then also what you're hearing about Iran. You're hearing that Iran could be an intervention as early as this weekend, even though he seems to have cooled any rhetoric against the Iranian regime. You think that that is still a go this weekend?
I absolutely do think it's a go, and I think it could happen. I mean, anytime, but I right now, with all the forces lined up in the Middle East, and then the main carrier arriving within the next like 72 hours, everything is in place. He apparently, if the reporting is correct, paused on bombing Iran because Israel had asked, for them to have a little bit more time for preparations. Um, but I'm sure that they've had, now several weeks to get everything together, to get all the assets into the region. And that's it. And there's no coincidence that you just had the head of Mossad, running around Washington a few days ago. So I'm sure that they are preparing something, and I'm sure that it's going to happen this month. It could be as early as this weekend because he likes to do these things on a Friday, Saturday.
Yeah, it ruins the weekends, of course. But the 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 objective here is regime change, is what you is right. I mean, this is not anything. They're not going for anything less than that.
I don't know because Trump he's a con artist by every single definition of what a con artist is.
Mm.
Um, he went into Venezuela, he plucked out Maduro and his wife from their bed and brought them to New York. But that's not regime change. I mean, this is just
No, it's not.
swapping out the leader and keeping the regime. So he likes to have these quick wins, which again, we don't know where it's going to go because Venezuela, either stays the same as is, except that they become basically under the control of the US when it comes to their oil and other resources, or it devolves into, people inside the regime say, we don't need to hand away all our oil to the United States. And you have internal conflict and, a potential coup of Maduro's vice president. But I mean, so with going back to Iran,
Yeah,
actual regime change, that's a little too complicated. Like, Trump would want something that looks good on
gotcha.
social media that shows, for people who aren't really savvy to geopolitics, who say, oh, wow, what an operation. But, that really won't have any impact. So, for instance, with Iran, it's more than the supreme leader. You have
Yeah,
the whole IRGC. I mean, you have a system embedded, just like in Russia, it's more than Putin. There's a full system embedded. So, swapping out, pulling out, for instance, Khamenei um, is not going to really do anything.
no, they would have to modernize an entire system there, of course. And as you pointed out, it's very hard to change a system like that overnight. It causes chaos, as we've learned in the past. So he's more likely to look for some caretaker government there. But the what we're seeing in this board of peace and this new technocratic government they're looking for in Gaza, Venezuela seems to now be run as a proxy state of the United States without any, without even trying to hide it. They just sort of, that's what they are. They're a proxy state. We're certainly seeing these countries turning into vassal states almost. They're sort of just there to produce for the empire, as it were. Is that even possible for a country like Iran, or is that it's Iran is not Venezuela?
Iran is not Venezuela, and Venezuela, I mean, I wouldn't get too, excited if I were Trump and too secure because again, to pluck someone out of their bed, yes, the U.S. military can accomplish it just like they accomplished Iraq in, 48 hours. That's not a problem when it comes to military objectives. They're excellent at completing these objectives. But literally, I believe we just finally got out of Iraq, I think, over the weekend. So, I mean, clearly, and nothing has changed. So, to with Venezuela, it's been 2 weeks. We don't know what's going to happen in a month, 2 months, 3 months. We already have reports, as of last week that you have the regime thugs, the collectivos running around, stopping people, seeing who's cooperating with the United States. And that is a very, very complex area because you have not only the cartels, but the mercenaries, and then the regime forces. I mean, this is such a mishmash that, you know, Americans to put boots on the ground will end up seeing extremely, very, very troubling scenes by cartels who are ruthless and have no problem, acting like ISIS and carrying out these hostage videos and whatnot. So, I wouldn't, when it comes to Venezuela, I wouldn't even
Yeah.
celebrate there because we don't know. I mean, we just happened 2 weeks ago.
But all we're seeing is a lot of horse trading amongst these major, dictator or powers. We're looking at China, Russia, and the United States basically dividing up the world in to their own needs, if it were, maybe in terms of their own spheres of influence. But you've got what we're seeing in Greenland, what we're seeing in Venezuela, what we're seeing in Iran, what we're seeing maybe in Taiwan later on. All these things are not just happening coincidentally, obviously at the same time. This is part of a plan. And we don't know what the full plan is, but you could just look at what's going on and make that assumption because it's just clearly couldn't be happening any other way. Is that your sense of things? Is that's what's, this is a rollout of a realignment of a new world order?
I think that they're attempting to do it. Will it work? I don't believe so. Because, I mean, right now, for instance, if you look at China and Russia, and this is what every analyst in the West gets wrong, they think that Russia and China are best friends. Meanwhile, they don't understand, the decades and decades, probably more than a century of distrust between China and Russia that continues to this day. So now China is, furious with Russia that they abandoned Maduro. And they are acting, very publicly about it. So when it comes to these, thugs, I mean, you're dealing with criminals and thugs who aren't the most trustworthy. So, would I sign an agreement like, here, you have this part of the world, I have that part of the world? I mean, these are bloodthirsty thugs who do not keep their word. And for Russia, I can tell you that Russia's biggest fear is China invading Russia. I mean, this is, to this day, they still worry and keep an eye in the Far East to make sure that there's no, invasion. And you have actually people part of the Far East who would rather connect to China than to Russia, which then, would cause a big loss for that. So I don't know if it's planned or not. I do know that Trump is attempting to, overthrow this order. Will he ultimately succeed? I don't think so. Because, I mean, yes, we're going to see a lot of chaos. We're going to see potentially, and we could see, Europeans fighting American troops, and shame on any American military person for executing these orders that are illegal because by the charter, you're really not supposed to be fighting and invading a NATO country, nor, killing any NATO military members. Um,
I'm so glad you
so
mentioned that. If
we'll
I can
see.
jump in there, because I want to introduce you to Janessa Goldbeck, who's joining us today. She's a vet herself. She's the CEO of Vet Voice Foundation. And hi, Janessa. It's good to see you again. It's been a while. Thanks for joining us. This is
Yeah,
Olga Lautman, by the way.
Hi.
nice to see you.
Nice to meet you.
What's so interesting is you were just mentioning Olga, and I know we're going to wrap up, but you were just mentioning the role of the of military not to do something illegal. And Janessa just today filed a brief in the Mark Kelly case in order to just argue exactly that. So well, maybe you should tell us first about that, Janessa, and then we'll switch over conversations in a bit. But this might be really interesting for everyone to hear together.
Yeah, you're totally right. Service members have a responsibility, a legal responsibility to refuse unlawful orders. So we were very proud today to submit an amicus brief in support of Senator Kelly, who, as I'm sure all the viewers are aware of, is being targeted by this administration for making a video where he reminded service members of their oath. So today, Vet Voice Foundation, which is the organization I lead, we're a national nonpartisan veterans advocacy organization, alongside 41 former service secretaries and senior military leaders, generals, admirals, all retired, filed this brief that made this argument at its core that um, the Senator Kelly has a right to free speech. Former military officials there are some limitations on what they can say, but he was exercising his First Amendment right. He was saying something that is true, that service members have a legal obligation to refuse illegal orders. And the reality is that the First Amendment doesn't disappear when someone has worn a uniform. It doesn't weaken when a veteran enters public life, and it shouldn't yield to political retaliation. So we were very proud to be able to put that together. Folks might know Protect Democracy and States United Democracy Center. Those two organizations took the lead on the legal arguments. We definitely couldn't have done it without them, but happy to.
It's great. It's a great thing you've done there. And I think it really underlines what everyone's been thinking, that this is not, acceptable, that these politicians who are former veterans are having their speech curtailed. And it's not just Mark Kelly. There's others involved. How many people are currently being targeted?
Off the top of my head, just on the Hill, I'm not sure. I know Senator Alyssa Slotkin has said that she's under investigation. Several members of the House who participated in that video are also under investigation. But really, the administration is has a very shaky legal argument. That's why they pursued censure as opposed to a formal court martial. They really didn't have a ground to stand on. But the reason they're doing it, and with such a high profile target, is that it is intended to send a chill down the spine of anyone who's ever worn a uniform, and to shut them up, to shut us up, to make it clear that they will retaliate, they will make our lives uncomfortable. And the reason they're doing that is because they know that veterans are uniquely resonant in today's society. They're one of the last groups. We are one of the last groups that have cross-partisan respect and appeal. And so when veterans speak, it is very powerful. It's very impactful. People listen. And the Trump administration is afraid of that. And so they're attempting to silence Senator Kelly, although I would say that their attempt has really backfired. He's raised quite a lot of money off of the attention he's getting from this. I think over 1 million new social media followers. So I mean, this is a decorated combat veteran and astronaut. Like, come
Yeah,
on.
it's really not a target you would go after, and probably setting up for a future run for the presidency, if not anything else. This is a big achievement, but when we talk about the following of orders and following illegal orders, because we've been having this conversation about this increased military effort that we're going to have now around the world. It looks like Iran, Greenland, with Venezuela, all these places. There is I mean, we think about the Nuremberg trial. That's the first thing that comes to my mind in terms of the trials, how that sort of set the foundation for following illegal orders is dangerous stuff. And every vet and every current soldier must be thinking, well, how do we get into the situation where I don't even know whether to follow these orders?
I mean, it's the administration has put service members into a real dilemma in a number of instances. Whether the National Guard should have been deployed into cities and states, which we argue vehemently against, and won in court multiple times. That there was not a reason to deploy National Guard into American cities and states, setting those National Guard, putting them into a situation where they are in a highly politicized, contentious deployment. And then in Venezuela, obviously, the president going in and with our special operators who conducted from a tactical perspective, an incredible operation. Our military deserves credit for that. But now the president's saying that we are going to run the country. That means potentially boots on the ground. Now we're in a whole other scenario to now the saber rattling at Greenland, Iran, etc. And so, we are in a very tenuous situation for civil military norms in this country. There is a reason the U.S. military has remained and is intended to be apolitical. As service members, we swear an oath to the Constitution, not to one man, not to a political party. And what this president is attempting to do is reshape the U.S. military into a tool of his own control, to do his bidding, regardless of law, both domestic or international law. And truly, you mentioned Nuremberg, Zev. That is one of the most important principles that was addressed in our brief that we filed today. Service members have an affirmative duty to refuse unlawful orders, and that obligation stems from the lessons of the Nuremberg trials, where following orders was rejected as a defense for unlawful conduct. So, if I was in uniform today, and I served honorably for 7 years as a Marine officer, I treasured my time in service and the people I served with, but it would be an incredibly difficult position to be wearing a uniform today and know that you may receive orders that this president says are legal. Strike that fishing boat off the coast, and yeah, we're going to tell you that those are combatants, and tap it again, even though those folks are clearly in the water. You're being asked to do these things, and we're seeing general officers resign and retire or be fired for refusing these orders. I think a lot about the service member who is further down the food chain, who doesn't have the capability to call up a JAG or talk to a lawyer about what they're being asked to do, and just the damage that does to the professionalism of the U.S. military.
So important. Olga, I know you've got to run, but if do you want to join in the conversation? Is there anything you want to ask, or is there anything else before you want to head off into your evening?
Well, to end, because we started
Yeah.
with, the 1 year anniversary of hell raining down on America again. To end, I am hopeful this 1 year in. I mean, despite the fact that we might invade Greenland within, any time within the next few weeks, days, weeks, and all the other chaos, I am hopeful because I can tell you, like, when you compare to autocratic systems like in Russia and what happened there, first of all, I wouldn't even be able to have this conversation there. That's
Mhm.
for starters. So we're 1 year in. I can freely speak. I've seen a lot of infringement, happening where you have these government thugs walking to people's houses, like, what did you post? That has nothing to do with violence. But these are intimidation tactics. And on the surface, this is not, you know, everything that he's done including with Mark Kelly, including with everything. It's good for him to get attention, but from an autocratic standpoint, our institutions are still holding because you see, no matter how many people they put under investigation, no matter how many doors they knock on, it's still different than like if per se you were living in Russia, or I don't know how Turkey is, or any of that. So that I'm very hopeful. And I mean, we still have a lot, to deal with, and it's going to get very ugly. And on the world stage, I mean, like I said earlier, our European allies, I don't even think we could call them this anymore. They're not going to forgive us, and we could kiss any intelligence sharing and anything, goodbye after the actions that have been taken up to now, the threats with Greenland. Um, so abroad, we're going to have challenges. Domestically, I think we will survive this, and that's it. And hopefully, we get Congress with a backbone that will actually start using their powers to further slow it down. So it's not just the courts that are the whatever thing in the road, stopping this
Yes.
overreach.
Absolutely.
And that's it.
Olga Lautman, you do incredibly heroic work, and you've done it for the last year, covering this administration's
Oh,
attorney as it's been captured by you on the Trump Tourney Tracker. And if people aren't subscribing yet to the Trump Tourney Tracker, they should be. And also to
thank
Unmasking
you.
Russia, that's your other big Substack. What's coming up on your Substack right now that people should know about?
Right now, I honestly just keep Ukraine in your thoughts because I mean, my friends, and it's heartbreaking even calling. I feel so guilty that I'm sitting here in New York, and everyone there is no heat, no electric, nothing. So just right now, like I want to use this time, just keep Ukraine in your thoughts because even though we all shifted to Greenland, I can't begin to tell you. I mean, the majority of the energy infrastructure has been wiped out in Ukraine
Oui.
across the whole country. And you have literally millions and millions of people sitting right now with no heat, so keep
Wow, I didn't
Ukraine
know
in
that.
your
That's
thoughts. and
something
and
else.
yeah, it's heartbreaking, it's horrible. I mean, everyone I deal with, and family, friends, like their spirit is still up. They're not gonna surrender, but, the news is not covering what's happening, and this probably we're in the worst period ever since, the full-scale invasion started. So,
And it's
mm,
only January 20th, still so many weeks of winter. Olga Lautman, thanks for being here. We'll see you again on Thursday for another update on the
thank
Trump
you for
Tourney
your
Tracker.
service.
So great to meet you.
You
Great
too.
that you guys are
Thank
meeting.
you.
All right. Bye, Olga. We'll see you on Thursday.
Bye. Have a good show. Bye.
Thank you. Janessa, let me just continue talking here. I mean, you hear these images that she's describing of what war looks like. And we seem to be gingerly sort of walking into this world war that Donald Trump has sort of laid us into, or leading us into. You talk to veterans all the time. What's the and to current soldiers? What's your current sense of how things are, how they're feeling inside the military? What's happening to them in terms of this presidency?
The military is a diverse place. It represents the diversity of America. All kinds of viewpoints are based there. So there certainly isn't one monolithic worldview. But I will say, from the people I've spoken with, who are both wearing the uniform today, speaking privately, and people who have served in the past, Donald Trump ran for president as the president. A man who said he was going to end wars in 24 hours. That
Yeah.
he wants the Nobel Peace Prize because he supposedly ended 8 wars. Look, y you know, whether or not any of that is true, what he did truly pledge to do, and felt like he was this was something he actually was committed to, was not starting new wars. And yet, now that he is in office, I think what we see, because of the president's greed and his desire to enrich himself, his friends, and his allies, and the lack of people around him who have any real care for the Constitution, the country, or the people in it, let alone the world, and the citizens of the world, that he's just, going wherever he can to get whatever he can and line his
Mm.
This his capture of Maduro, the oil fields in Venezuela, his interest in Greenland, all of these things are bargaining chips for him to enrich himself privately at the expense of the country, and most seriously, at the expense of human life and
Mm.
safety and security. We heard him today. The administration is just blatantly stating out loud something they have danced around for many years. When his first term, he attempted to increase NATO's own commitments to financially, but now he's questioning the relevancy of NATO writ large and whether or not it should even exist as an international institution. The things that keep us safe as Americans, our partnerships with our allies, our intelligence sharing with our allies, the international systems that have been built to prevent world war. This president is going after directly. So it's a really
Absolutely.
scary time.
It is. You didn't hear maybe the first part of the conversation there, but Olga speaks to a lot of people in that NATO world. She says that all these countries no longer trust America, and for that reason alone, the idea of NATO is just dying because no one trusts America anymore. And that's such a hard thing to hear. It's hard for everyone to hear. It must be incredibly hard for veterans and current soldiers to hear. Or I wanted to point out a Substack article you wrote about the Insurrection Act, which really struck me. I think it was such a beautiful, or this terrifying piece that you wrote about what it means to have the Insurrection Act. Could you tell us a little bit more about what that really means for people if the Insurrection Act is invoked?
Certainly, and I think just before I get into that, I do want to say my last deployment was I was stationed in Romania. I had a platoon in Romania and a platoon in Norway. We were there in support of infantry training operations alongside NATO allies and other European countries. We were there to train in case of further Russian aggression into Ukraine, and knowing, I mean, just at a very tactical level. I was there when Trump had just been inaugurated for his first term. And I
Mm,
will never forget that we were getting ready to do a live fire exercise. We are going to be sending troops downrange with live fire over their heads. It was a multinational exercise. And the president of the United States went on TV the night before and gave this whole ranting press conference about how NATO was worthless and how NATO countries
mm,
were worthless. And then we had to go downrange. This was a training environment. There was no enemy shooting back at us, but we were using live rounds. There was real danger involved. It required
yeah.
precision. And that's like the most tactical example of what this president is putting the United States and our allies, the position he's putting them in. Why should they trust us when we are breaking, norm and agreement and treaty and all of these things every single day, and then speaking so disrespectfully about people that we have, gone down range with a number of times. So I just wanted to say that going forward because I think we hear about intelligence sharing and all of these things at the sort of strategic level, but truly at the tactical level, this gets all the way down to the
Hmm.
lance corporal or captain on the ground, boots on the ground, in a dangerous place.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
you asked about the Insurrection Act.
Mm,
And the reason that I wrote a piece about it is because we're seeing this administration build the legal argument for using the Insurrection Act here at home. Over the past year, we've seen this administration deploy National Guard into places like Chicago, Portland, Los Angeles, under the pretext that there was some level of insurrection-like activity going on that the state's law enforcement and the state forces couldn't handle. In state after state, the governors and local leaders, as well as states' attorneys general, pushed back on the administration's claims that there was a level of violence that required National Guard to be federalized and deployed there. And in every case, with the exception of Washington, D.C., which has its own laws and rules that are specific to Washington, D.C., in every case, in all of those cases, the administration lost. Courts with judges appointed from both Republicans, both Democrats, including some appointed by the Trump administration, all said, this is all hyperbolic. This is exaggerated. There is no need for the National Guard in these places. And so we saw the administration pull back after the Supreme Court ruling that stated that. But what it left open was the potential use of the Insurrection Act. The Insurrection Act is a law that allows the president to deploy active duty military forces into American cities and states and have them conduct domestic law enforcement. This is very different than the National Guard. The active duty military, the National Guard are trained to do some degree of crowd control, to do some degree of protecting property, creating a buffer in times of civil disturbance or disobedience. The active duty military is trained to lay rounds down range, to close with and destroy the enemy. You do not want the U.S. military, the active duty military, deployed domestically
Let's
conducting.
just underline that for everybody, because the National Guard, everyone thinks the military is already inside American states. They're not inside American states. The National Guard is there. That is part of the military, but it's a very different training, very different kind of environment. It's just everything's very different than having the actual military who are trained for these other circumstances to be poured into cities to do domestic law enforcement. So I think everyone just needs to understand that if the Insurrection Act is enabled or enacted, it means a whole different level of activity by a very different kind of military.
That's right. It's one of the most extreme domestic authorities available to a president. And that's why over the last 2.5 centuries, it's been used very infrequently as an extraordinary response to severe domestic disorder or a failure to enforce federal law or civil rights. And so in this case, because the Supreme Court closed off the option for the president to federalize the National Guard and said, no, you can't just say there's an insurrection and send in the Guard. That leaves the Insurrection Act as an authority the president has without a lot of checks or balances, hardly any, to deploy the military domestically. And in order to do that, he has to have some sort of legal basis. And so what he is doing is trying to compare what Governor Walz and Mayor Fry and other Democratic leaders in Minnesota are to segregationist governors during the civil rights era. And this is so it's turning history on its head. So
Yeah.
Act was used during the civil rights era to go after to go into states where governors were refusing to desegregate. So the federal forces went in to help protect the rights of Black Americans and ensure their constitutional freedoms were respected. In this case, the president today, the administration today, Department of Justice issued grand jury subpoenas to Governor Walz, to Mayor Fry, to a number of other leaders
It's crazy.
in Minnesota, because they're trying to make the case that they are somehow not enforcing federal
Yeah.
law. That is
Yeah.
absolutely not true. The only, the Minnesota leadership is sending the message by talking through their law enforcement and having the National Guard on standby that all civil disobedience and protests should be done peacefully. The level of violence is nowhere near where it was when it was used to justify the use of the Insurrection Act during the Civil Rights era. And the leaders in Minnesota and Minneapolis are not disobeying a federal law or regulation. They're simply saying we are not going to use any of our state resources to help ICE or federal immigration authorities, which is something they are legally allowed to do.
Of course, they legally must do. I mean, it's their duty to do that. The violence really has come from the ICE agents on the ground. I mean, in almost every single case, there's been violence has originated from there, and yet here we are facing this unusual circumstances where Mayor Fry is being investigated, but the person who shot Renee Good is not.
That's right.
I mean, it's completely turning everything upside down, which is what this president seems to specialize in. But going back to the Insurrection Act, what is it going to look like if these troops are deployed into Minnesota or into any other states? What does it actually mean?
Well, I hope to never see this, but if we were to see the Insurrection Act deployed, in practical terms, it would allow active duty military forces to enforce civilian law. So you might see uniformed troops conducting arrests, establishing checkpoints, enforcing curfews, and using force under military command rather than civilian policing standards. So it really dramatically collapses the distinction between soldiers and police officers, which is a line that democratic societies have guarded carefully for centuries, especially the United States. If he were to employ the Insurrection Act, it gives the president a huge amount of authority. There's no requirement for the governor's consent if the president is deploying troops under the Insurrection Act. There's no automatic or pre-deployment judicial review that's built into the statute, and the determination that an insurrection, obstruction of federal law, or failure to protect constitutional rights exist is made largely by the executive branch itself. So you
Mm.
can just sort of think through what that might mean in practice.
I mean, does it in fact incur or can it stop elections? I mean, is there a way that that can be used, as many people fear, from either interrupting elections or interfering in the election results?
Look, I mean, this is my great concern about where this is all headed. In 2025, we saw the president testing the legal authorities and how much courts would restrain him around use of the National Guard. Now, we're hearing threats to deploy the Insurrection Act. We're seeing the legal groundwork being laid with these subpoenas in Minnesota. Let's say that active duty troops are deployed into Minnesota and then there is further unrest, that this sparks additional unrest. Will we see those troops be recalled before the election? Will we see another pretense? Perhaps we annex Greenland or strike Iran, and there is, God forbid, some retaliatory action that causes casualties of American troops, and that's then used as a pretext for further militarization of American cities and states, and that bleeds into the 2026 election. This is my great concern. I think this president has stated a number of times his belief that if he doesn't win the presidency or win the election, that it was rigged. And so I can certainly see him trying to use all the tools at his disposal to discourage turnout, to frighten people away from the ballot boxes, and to try to change the outcome of what is gearing up to be a landslide for Democrats in the House.
Oh, should be. Yeah, absolutely. Let me do another little roundup here of who's joined us. Ellie Leonard is here. She's another great
Hello.
Substack independent investigative journalist. Janessa Goldbeck,
Hi, nice to
veteran,
meet you.
and veteran. And what's the organization's name again? I don't have it in front of me right now. So,
Nation.
I'm glad you guys are meeting, because it's so great to have these Substackers, just get to know each other. You guys are all working on different parts of the spectrum here, but Ellie's been working on investigating a story involving Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein's abuse, and we're going to get to that in just a second. We can talk about that. But Ellie, I don't know if you managed to catch much of this conversation about the Insurrection Act or anything like that. Okay. So we started the conversation with Olga Lautman talking about potentially World War III. You can't believe we're talking about these things. We've been moving on to talk about Mark Kelly and the attempt to silence him, and now we're talking about the Insurrection Act and what that means for the elections coming up. So it's quite an emotional tour, actually, when you think about the terrain we've covered today, and we're about to get into something even more complex. But Janessa, just to wrap up here, you seem concerned. I mean, and your writing is, you're at a heightened level of just awareness of what's going on. And what's your message to Americans who are just, as concerned as you are, maybe even scared because of what might be coming soon?
I think we are right to be extremely concerned, and it's completely valid to feel fear. We're seeing things that I never thought I would see in this country in my lifetime, and I hoped to never see. But my message is simply that courage begets courage. We are seeing folks like Senator Kelly refusing to back down, refusing to acquiesce to the president, to the administration's threats, and that courage is inspiring other military leaders to step forward. I think that's why we were able to have 41 retired general officers and service secretaries join in this amicus brief that we filed today in support of him. And then I'm seeing veterans and everyday citizens on social media every day being willing to go out to the protests, to be part of the bodies in the streets, to share the message and to have the tough conversations with their friends and family. So keep showing up. Don't let fear win, because courage begets courage, and that is how we will build a coalition that can topple this authoritarian regime, end the corruption, and hopefully bring America into a much freer and and fairer place to live.
Janessa Goldbeck, that's very beautifully said, and everyone should subscribe to your Substack. There's some beautiful writing there. You do a great job, and you describe the stakes that we're all facing very, very clearly, and you do great work. So thank you for your service, and thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. Have a great rest of your
Nice to
home.
meet you.
We'll see you
Nice
next
to meet you.
time. Bye bye. She's so it's really fantastic example of what the U.S. military produces, has produced, and does leave you feeling a little bit better about the world, because you think, people like that are making the decisions about what they're doing inside the military. Maybe there's some hope left in terms of resisting what this president is doing. Ellie, how are you doing? Haven't seen you for a few days. I feel like
I
I see
know.
you every
How are
day.
you? What a week.
It's it's only Tuesday,
It's all-
but it has been a week.
I went
It's
and hid this weekend. I was like, sorry, guys. I have to turn my phone off and hide for like 24 hours just for my own mental health. But it was, yeah, lots
Yes,
going on.
there's been a lot. I mean, it feels like a lifetime every day, doesn't it? It just feels like
A little bit.
you just catch your breath, and then there's another story happens, another
Hmm.
story happens, and it just keeps just jumping on top of each other.
Yeah.
I know you're about to publish, where you have published this very interesting story about Sasha Riley, which is a name that many of us have gotten to know on Substack, because it's a story that originated, I think, as far as I know, on Substack, but it's
Hmm.
sort of it floated up to everybody, and some people ran with it because they thought it was a very legitimate story, and some of us had questions about it. You've written about it, you've investigated it a lot. We've had many conversations,
Hmm.
like maybe a couple of days of our lives have
Yep.
disappeared as we try to figure this
I know.
out. But
Yeah. I think there was like 8 hours straight of me
yeah,
sitting in a coffee shop texting you.
but what did you find? What's the story about, and what do you think is important that people take away from this?
Okay, I will give the caveat. It just probably published just now. The caveat that I have with this story is my conclusion does not have to be your conclusion. All I did was I went based on the facts that I could find. I tried to prove the things that I could prove. If there were things to be disproved, I disproved them. And then there's things that I just don't know. And so my conclusion about this case does not need to be your conclusion,
Mhm.
because I always, always, always want there to be a platform for survivors to come forward and tell their stories. And I'm not going to say, hold on, I'm not going to believe you until I investigate this here. I'm going to believe you first, and then I'm going to backpedal and I'm going to go investigate, because I think people need to know that they're believed at the outset. And then we'll do the work. And that's happened with every survivor that has come forward. People have investigated their stories. And again, I don't come at this with any kind of career investigative work, no legal work. This is purely based on my ability to do research.
Mhm.
And so this story
But
is
it's very
really,
thorough. The research you've done is very thorough, and it goes down paths that traditional investigative journalists have used for many decades. I mean, I think everything you've done is rock solid in terms of understanding
yeah,
this case. So, yes, your conclusions may not have to be everyone else's conclusions,
right,
and things could have happened
right,
that may
right.
not be related to the stuff that we're
Absolutely,
discussing.
absolutely, absolutely. And
Someone might have experienced trauma in a different way.
yes. So backtracking, I'm not gonna, outside of Sasha Riley, I'm not gonna name anybody's name in this story. If they want to name themselves, that's fine. I was approached on Signal in September, early September, by someone who said, is this a safe vein to tell a story?" I said yes. And they proceeded to, I was at my son's soccer practice, and I was on the phone with this person for an hour. And it was the story of Sasha Riley. I was taking a lot of notes. This person gave me, endless information, pictures of text messages, pictures from family, medical record, or not medical records, military records, you know, things that are not published online. And those things, obviously, I did not include in my paper because they are not public. Um, at some point, I've been approached by a few survivors. At some point, I was getting an inkling about this story, but I didn't want that to affect my ability to still do my homework about it, because you never know what kind of story somebody's going to bring to you, even if it doesn't match up with the other stories. There are patterns, but that doesn't mean that everything has to be the same way every time. This story is very heavy handed. It is, people are shocked by it. The details that Sasha gives about the type of abuse he suffered. His story is that these trafficking farms in like Oklahoma and Missouri, where children were brought in by helicopter and small plane to service and then be killed by people like Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump. And he goes into great detail about this.
It's
Obviously,
just to back it. So these are
yeah,
allegations against
yeah,
Jeffrey Epstein and the President of the United States, which we're not saying are true or anything like that. We're just
right.
saying these are claims made
These are
by this
claims made.
person,
Yeah,
and related, and that's all we can say about them. There's no
right,
evidence to link, as far as I know, Trump
right,
to any of these things, and that's just
right.
important to say for everybody to
Yes,
understand.
and that is, and so what I was given is names, places, information that I can look up through genealogy. I can look it up through birth records. I can look it up through marriage and death and birth licenses or birth, certificates. I use a website called Been Verified that does very deep background checks on people and all the places that they've lived and maps them out and shows, where interactions have crossed and who their relatives are. I did a lot of research, and there were things that could line up, and then there were things that absolutely could not line up. The main important detail that I could not work out in my head is the idea of his father. He was very clear that his father is William Kyle Riley, goes by Bill Riley, and he posted a picture of him. That picture was linked back to a Facebook page that shows that Bill Riley is 76 and he's living in Georgia. Still alive, lives with his wife, Cindy. I could not find a record of their marriage. I could not find records of their kids. So that's sort of like I don't have definitive information about him. But then we had this information about there being a Bill Riley in the files. And the
Right.
link that Sasha was making was that Bill Riley was a pilot, but he was also an investigator. And that he was this man who was bringing children, via small plane to these farms where they would be killed by Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein. Well, the thing is, and then they were using documents from the Epstein files to show where Epstein had talked about Bill Riley in his emails, and they talked about him in the Palm Beach police reports. But the problem with that is Epstein hired an investigator called William Riley, who had his own private investigation clinic or private investigation company with another man. And he was kind of this sketchy investigator that he hired during his first ordeal with the courts, that he would have, follow the women and harass them. And there are police reports where the women said, "I'm being followed and people are calling me and threatening me on the phone." And that was this investigator hired by Epstein named Bill Riley. But the problem with that is William John Riley, and he died in 2011. He never lived in Georgia. He's from New York State. So those two men are two different men. And so if Sasha Riley is declaring that this picture of this man who's named Bill Riley is his father, that's not the same as the Bill Riley who's in the Epstein files and who knew Epstein and who worked as an investigator. Now, his father, if that is his father, is a pilot. He's right about that. He worked with like emergency air services and he did like these EMT type pilot services. But then you start to go into wives and mothers. Sasha Riley talks about his mom being this woman who's either Marie Lynn Riley or Lynn Riley. She has a couple other different last names. She has one that's Hasbrook, which is her maiden name. There's another last name that's like Majak, who is actually her husband, who she was married to from, I believe, the late 60s until 1980. And then you have actually on these adoption papers that he's presented, you have a completely different woman named Irene who's listed as William K. Riley's wife. And so you start to get a little bit of a confusion because now we have Cindy, we have Marie, we have who did I just name? Irene.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have this completely other woman who's married to William Riley, the investigator, who he was married to for 48 years. And I think her name is like Jeanette or Suzanne. Again, it's listed in there. But you start to get a little bit of confusion about who his mother was. And because there's this issue of adoption, he is not listed as a child for any of these people. So when you look up their family trees, he's not listed as their children anywhere. which could have to do with his adoption. That can make that a little more confusing. But when I looked at the actual adoption papers, and I cannot, with my skill level, I can't identify if the adoption paper is real or not. I don't have the ability to do.
Yeah.
But his last name on those adoption papers was spelled 2 different ways, which was interesting to me. I
didn't know that. What is the spelling?
So they spelled it Barros, and then further down they spelled it Barrows. And so maybe that's just a mistake. I don't know, but I found that to be a little bit interesting. And then you start to look at, you have this story about his time in the military, which he served 3 tours in Iraq, and each one were about a year each. And you have this story about, a fellow soldier being court-martialed because he was watching snuff films of these kids who were killed on this farm, and they found him with the videos. And the person who reported all this to me sent me the text messages sent by Sasha to whoever this, other soldier was, to kind of show that had occurred. And as far as I know from reading these text messages, this person, and again, they could be lying.
Yeah.
They didn't know who Sasha was. They said, "Are you sure you're talking to the right person? I have no idea. I don't know what movie you're talking about. I don't know the situation you're talking about." And so at the end of this conversation, when I'm first hearing about this, I was fully willing to look into this. And I said, what do we have? What can we go on with this? And the person said, well, we have the audio tapes, which now we all have.
Mm-hmm.
But there was this long list of things that they were trying to get. And it was Sasha's medical records to show that he had been tortured, and then police reports. And they wanted the medical report of Trump's rectal exam, and all these different things that I said, okay, that's kind of a lot of stuff. Do we have a witness that we could talk to who was somebody else?
Mm-hmm.
And they said, nope, they're all dead. And I said, well, that makes it a little bit tough because we have no one to corroborate. And then you look at the timeline and you have, Sasha was born in 1973. So by the time he was adopted in 78, I believe, he would have been about 5. And then he has this timeline of 9 to 13. So there would have been a period of time, and it was said that he was adopted to be trafficked, but there was a period of time where he wouldn't have been trafficked. But also that only went till about spring of 1987, which would have been the longest it could have gone. And by all accounts, Trump didn't meet Epstein until later in 1987 or early in 1988.
Yeah.
So there's a very short window of time when they could have met. And there's nothing on the record, which it doesn't have to be on the record, but there's no record of either man spending any time in Oklahoma until Trump started campaigning for presidency in 2015. So I had a lot of information, but I just could not link anything up. And that doesn't mean that Sasha was not sexually abused. It doesn't mean that the story is not true, but I just literally have no way to connect any of the dots, which makes it very complicated because on the one hand, I want to give them a platform to talk if this is a true story and there's evidence and there's, police records and things like that. But I want to be really careful because we do have a whole lot of survivors with stories. And if we have a story that turns out not to be true, that can affect the veracity, or I'm not sure that's the right word, but that affects how true we perceive the other survivors' stories to be.
Yeah. Look, I think firstly, excellent work, because I think what you've done is all the right steps, and regardless of what people might be saying on the chat or whatever, this to me is it just factually doesn't line up with events as we know them to be. And I've looked at the Epstein Trump relationship probably more than almost anybody. I can tell you there isn't much of a record before 1987 to suggest they even encountered each other. And then, for this window of assaults to happen between 1982 and 1986 meant that they would have had to have engaged in some sort of very sophisticated snuff film operation and pornographic
Mhm.
operation, which is not where we saw them sort of spending their time. I mean,
Right.
yes, they were involved in all sorts of terrible things with underage women, but I've never heard of any of this
Yeah.
other stuff going on. Which doesn't mean he didn't go through it, which doesn't mean
Yeah. That's the conclusion.
something
That's his
terrible could have happened to him.
right.
And I don't know if I had met anybody at the age of 9 or 10 or 11 and as an adult, I would have been able to recognize them
Mhm.
later on in life at all. I'm not sure
Right.
that it's, even if
Well,
they're famous, even if there were all these
right.
things, I'm just not sure.
Well, and then Jeffrey Epstein especially because he would have been less famous than Donald Trump. He would have
Yeah.
been pretty much nobody in the 80s.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, absolutely. And why would Donald Trump even, it's just
right.
not his
Well, and then
style,
there was just like and then I went down the rabbit hole of like anatomy. And the idea of stabbing someone in the rear end with a tent pole.
Yeah.
And so I researched what does a tent pole look like in 1987, right? Like
Yeah.
what kind, and there's three types. There's like your typical tent stake that's 6 inches. There's like the kind for your car that's 12, and then there's like the big canvas tents at 18. And even if you had the very smallest one, the amount of anatomy that you would damage lethally in the human body by if you had that precision, if you had that ability to be that precise, it's all sorts of arteries up there. He would have bled out immediately and not had time to be airlifted.
Yeah. Also, Donald Trump famously a germaphobe, always had,
Yeah,
this
gloves.
doesn't strike me as something he would ever be
Yeah.
involved in personally. He might order someone to do it. That's a whole other thing.
Hmm.
But for him to actually be personally, physically involved in, I guess it's just not.
It just was extreme, and the tent stake thing. I grew up going to church, and I know that there's a story about somebody escaping by stabbing someone with a tent stake, and that
Yes.
kind of hit a little nerve with me. And I thought, that sounds really familiar. Doesn't mean it's not going to happen, but I just, Trump was a big guy. And I'm trying to imagine a little, he's shown pictures of himself when he was a kid. He was a small kid. It just doesn't strike me as a physically possible thing
Yeah.
to do. And why would he put a condom on it before?
Yeah.
Like, why would a kid think to put a condom on a tent stake before they stab somebody with it? There were just things there that felt like it was a little bit like they took it a little step too far with the
Yeah.
storytelling, and it didn't add up for me.
So that leads you to the next possibility. And by the way, the Bill
Right.
Wiley that did work with Epstein was a private investigator. Was not a nice person at all.
Right. No,
Was
terrible guy.
harassing.
Terrible.
He was not. And clearly the thing which leads me to believe is that this is maybe potentially, and I'm not accusing anyone of anything, but it looks to me like an attempt to create a disinformation story. Now, I'm not saying that this didn't happen to anybody.
Right.
I'm just want everyone to be completely conscious that it could have happened to him. These could be real stories, but it's also very likely or possible that what we're all experiencing as a community and as a group of people are very deeply interested in America and in what happened to Jeffrey Epstein is an attempt to disinform us, is an attempt to distract us, is an attempt to move us into a different direction, because this is often what it looks like.
Right.
I've been through this a number of times, and I can tell you that, you know, every single disinformation operation has kernels of truth to it. Every single one has something that you could say, well, that happened. I know that happened, or I recognize that name, or I know that, because that's how they hook you in.
Right.
It needs to have a kernel of truth, sometimes more than a kernel, but it has truths in it. And then they build stuff around it. And the timing of this particular event and the targeting of the people that are involved. So you've got, a group of us on Substack who are very interested in Epstein at a time when they're trying to bury the truth about Epstein. So to have this disinformation version of what's going on distract us all, take up some of the space on Substack, and also, just distract us attention wise. It seems to line up for me there as well, that there's,
Right.
that particular timing and the targeting of you specifically, of me, of all these people that were
Right.
investigating these
And
things.
I did wonder if I was the only person this person reached out to, because when they did, it felt like that. It felt like they hadn't talked to anyone else, but now in hindsight, I kind of wonder if I was the only person.
I think you might have been. Who knows? But they probably were. But the way it rolled out, even afterwards, we were all sort of like encouraged to follow it. We were all people coming
Yeah,
at us from
very
that we hadn't heard
popular.
of before, saying, "Hey, what do you think of the Sasha Riley case?" And all of that makes you think, well, just because I've been through it, I've seen this
Mhm.
sort of thing before. In the middle of it, you feel so like you've got something, and you really want to believe them, and you want to chase the story and make sure that and prove it correct. But
Right.
sometimes you've also got to be able to step back and say, this thing, is maybe just
Something.
a operation targeted to do a little bit of what it
Yeah.
did. It did take everyone's attention a little bit
Well,
away from the Epstein files that week, and it
yeah.
took away from a bunch of other things that were developing during that week. So,
And
yeah, go ahead.
I just feel like I feel like also, it's so easy to believe something that speaks the language of something we already agree to. We already know that Donald Trump has most likely sexually abused underage girls. We already know that he's committed crimes. He's a criminal. He's a felon. And so to hear a story that kind of fits that narrative but becomes a little bit more extreme, people really jump on it because they go, "Yeah, this tells the story of the thing that I already want to be true, and we'll get him out of office." But what I would say to that is he's already guilty. He's already beyond guilty. He's already to the point where we know that he's committed these crimes. He's already been charged with E. Jean Carroll and her rape. He's already had 34
Yep.
indictments against him. Like, he's already guilty. And we can stack things on top of that, but he is already going to face a consequence. And I think as long as we know we're doing our homework and we're doing our research and we're not glossing over something that could be true, because I don't want a survivor to not be believed, and I don't want someone to walk away feeling like they weren't heard. But as long as we stay the course, we're going to get there with the things that he has already done, and
Right.
they're a lot.
But part of an operation is also to discredit people like you or me or anybody else doing
Hmm.
these investigations by planting something that they hope will report that is incorrect, because then they can
Yeah,
prove you covered something incorrectly, or you got something wrong. So it's an attempt to snare you, or snare others into doing the wrong thing and publishing an incorrect story. So I'm glad you didn't, and I'm glad you've covered the story in the way you have. And it's a very
yeah,
thorough read, and it actually gives you, everyone who reads it will know that it gives you insight into how Ellie works, and the detail to which she goes into every little bit of information. The tools you use are smart, and the kinds of tools that we never always had. I remember
yeah.
days when
Right,
you didn't
right.
have all these
Well,
genealogy tools and things like that, and you
yes,
used to finding this kind of information used to be a lot harder. Now you
right.
do
And
have those, and kudos to you for using all the
thank you.
all the right tools and all the right information to build this very thorough, I think, investigation of what
Thank you.
Sasha
Well, and
Riley is really
I
about.
was nervous about this because, I haven't been here that long, and I don't know how much credibility I've built up with my writing or my skill. And so the idea of bringing something forward and maybe coming to a conclusion that people don't want when this has been so big was a little scary. And I was I'm not gonna lie, I was a little nervous about it. And I wrote this several days ago. Like I said, you and I, were chatting quite a lot one day, back and forth with, what have you found? Here's what I found. But I'd also sent it to a couple other journalists that I hold in very high esteem and who are much closer to this Epstein story than I ever will be or ever have been.
Mhm.
Um, and I said, what am I missing? What have I forgotten? What am I forgetting to look for? What clue did what did I get wrong here? I just go over it with a fine tooth comb and tell me what I'm not seeing. And, one was a little more hesitant about publishing right away because I think, again, same reason, like it's a little scary to publish something like this. But the one who was the closest, I think, of anybody to this story gave me full blessings and the green light and said, "You got to get this out there." So once I had that, I thought, okay, I trust you, and I'm going to go for it.
Yeah, I think your instincts and that person's instincts, I think, you talk about it right.
Mhm.
And I look, this is what journalism is about, and this is what this community is about. It's going to be very difficult sometimes for us to accept that some things aren't true, and that's why we're crowdsourcing is an incredible tool. This community is an incredible tool. Everyone should be doing the homework as well to yourselves and researching story with as much suspicion as you need to, because we are
Right.
now, just because of the growth of Substack and also the journalism being done here is so unique and so independent and so different from anything you can get anywhere else. We're going to be under this kind of targeting a lot, whether it's stuff like this, which is, I think, a disinformation operation, but also it could be any number of different types of operations that could come at us from different sides. And it's where we'll be tested, I guess. That's the mettle of these independent journalists is going to be tested
Right.
in whether we can, suss out what's real and what's not in this environment.
And again, my conclusion at the end of the article is
Yeah.
I may not be right. This is just my own research, my own approach. This story may not be over. We may hear more, find out more, get more details. But I can only look up and vet the things that I have and find the details that I can find and present them to you, and that's all I can do.
Yeah, and if anyone has information which changes the chronology, that would be a big thing. I mean, the
Right.
chronology that we look
Time is
at
a
right now,
huge.
like I can't make this timeline. I mean, I do all my work on timelines. It's such an important
Mhm.
thing for me. If I can't make a timeline work, it just doesn't. It's hard to put someone in a place at a specific time and then say they were somewhere else. It's just, and
Yeah.
in this case, I just don't see how
Yeah.
it's possible. Now, timing could be different. Maybe his
Right.
recollection is different. Maybe
Mhm.
there's different evidence that comes out. Maybe Jim Jordan is somewhere else in a different place and,
Right.
whatever. But in this case, none of the chronology seemed to line up. The Bill Riley thing to me was a indication that someone had picked a name in the Epstein world and sort of matched it
Right.
versus the other way around, and so that to me was questionable. um and it did make me dig into Bill Riley, the actual the actual
Mhm.
investigator involved in the Epstein case. It was a
Yeah,
really
he's very interesting.
He's an interesting guy as well,
Yeah.
and he was not a good guy, and it tells you a
Mm-mm.
lot about how Epstein operated and
Yeah.
how seriously that ring of people who were involved in abusing the girls in Palm Beach were trying to
Mhm.
shut down that case, because this guy
Yeah.
Bill Riley, the original Bill Riley, was trying to do a lot of damage to the case, and was one of the reasons it was moved over to the FBI at the end of the day. It was because
Mhm.
this network of people were trying to shut down the story. And this is the same network that ultimately got Jeffrey Epstein off the hook and got him into just this
Right.
very limited, state prosecution, even though it was run by by the feds. It was a state charge. This was an indication of how seriously that network operated, and it reminded me of how important it is to refocus on Epstein and also Trump in this era, because, in fact, there's a lot of terrible things that these people did. And what I do in The Greatest Heist and talk about the financial crimes that we're still unpacking right now, but just the subversion of justice that happened in the Jeffrey Epstein case in 2006, 2008 is terrible. It's a warning for everybody. It's a warning to us all that no matter how rich and powerful someone is, we should never let them get away with these kinds of horrific crimes. And to me, if anything, this whole Sasha Riley story is just a reminder of how powerful this network is, and how
Mhm.
how powerfully they've been able to suppress the story. And until today, we still have not seen the Epstein files in their completion. I don't know if we ever will see those Epstein files in
Yeah.
completion, and we really deserve to see them. It's law that we see them.
Mhm.
And yet this government, this administration continues to cover it up, continues to hide the facts from the American people. And the American people need to see them, have to see them, because it involved us all. We're all victims, really, of the same network. So, if anything, it's just a reminder of that for me. Anything that you take away from it that you feel like,
No,
y-
I think my guess is this story is probably not done. I don't know. I don't know where it goes from here. I am curious to see what the response is tonight. Again, a little nervous about that. But I do, yeah, I wonder what the results from this will be. Because another, and I think you had mentioned this, another interesting piece was that this story that was published on Substack was actually published like a month and a half before it became, big news. And why did it become big news all of
Mm.
a sudden when it had been sitting there for a month and a half? That was a little bit interesting, and we don't necessarily have a reason for that. But I do think that there is more to come potentially on this story.
Yeah, I think there is. And also, I think people should really learn about disinformation a lot and how these operations happen because, there's something else that popped up in the stream the other day, and I put out a little post about it. Someone who was questioning another story we had all worked on together. Um, and and it was clearly a Russian disinformation bot. They'd used language that was like sort of flimsy English.
Yeah, I
They'd
remember
used,
that.
yeah. So this is, this is happening everywhere in different ways, and people need to get very literate about it because it's going to continue to happen and get much bigger
Yeah.
because we are heading into a very volatile period of the world. They ramp this up. They amp this up. If you look at Ukraine and what they've done there, massively when these things happen. So everyone's got to be aware of what these things look like, feel like, and be able to spot them. And if you do spot something that's a fake, or that's not real, or that doesn't line up, it's really incumbent on you to share that with everybody because it stops the story early. The earlier we can stop a lie, the earlier we can stop disinformation, the more effective it is. It doesn't spread. If you let it go for a day or two, it starts spreading like wildfire. So really, if you spot something early, you know that it's fake, make sure you share that with everybody. It's really important that we
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah.
Great work, Ellie.
Thanks, Zev.
You must feel, I could tell this burden of these
It's a lot.
stories. I'm sorry.
Yeah, the story was a lot. There's a long week. It's
Yeah,
Tuesday.
but
Yeah.
but you do great work, and
Thank you.
I know you're getting a lot of subscribers because of this and other work that you do, and it's justified. If people are watching and aren't yet subscribers to Ellie Leonard and the
Thank you.
Panicked Writer, do so right now. She's worth
Please
a
subscribe
subscription.
to The Greatest Heist on narrative.org.
Thank you very
I'll
much.
be reading that.
And I really appreciate you sharing your
Yeah.
story with us tonight. And I hope
Thank you.
everyone reads it and shares it as well, because everyone
you.
needs to know what it's all about. And it's been a longish show tonight, but I want to thank Olga Lautman and Janessa Goldbeck and Ellie Leonard for being here, and all of you at home for sharing in the experiences as we've been unpacking this unusual, volatile week in the news.
Yeah.
And it's only, as you point out, Tuesday. Have a great
All right.
night, Ellie, and have
You
a great
too.
night, everybody.
Bye,
See you
guys.
next time. Bye.